Hello, and thank you for joining us for this OBL complimentary member webinar series on virtual meetings and trainings. In this initial session, we will be focused on participant best practices, and we will be reviewing 6 steps for effective participation in any virtual meeting or training. This program is beneficial whether you are attending a meeting from the office or whether you are attending a virtual meeting or training from a remote location or at home. It is also beneficial if you have leveraged these systems multiple times or if you're new to using these systems. I want to start by making sure that people are aware of why we have limitations to the effectiveness of virtual programs. And one thing that comes to play when we have a webinar series especially or a training is the time needed to be able to make sure that the content is valuable and the participant feels that it was worth their time. Webinars you'll find are typically 30 to 45 minutes or more to provide enough information around a base content, supporting materials, and allowing time for Q&A. The limitation comes in the fact that the adult attention span typically begins to wane after 15 to 20 minutes. So only halfway through a webinar's content, the adult attention span will begin to wane and it will be harder for them to pay attention to what's going on. The other limitation we have is a physiological one. We have the ability in our brains to comprehend significantly more than most people have the ability to speak. On average, most human beings can speak 100 to 150 words per minute. However, our brains have the ability to comprehend 400 to 500 words per minute. This is a pretty big gap. And during that period of time between the 150 words that somebody finished speaking and the 400 to 500 words that your brain is trying to comprehend, it's looking for additional input and information. And that is why distractions become such a huge issue. When we go through this content, we'll be talking about ways that we can make sure that you have the ability to continue to focus and bring your attention back to a virtual meeting or webinar. And we will be talking about ways to engage with yourself so that you are able to keep paying attention and keep returning to the webinar even when your attention gets focused in other directions. To talk about the 6 steps and help you remember how to leverage them going forward, we're going to pull on a slogan from back in the 1960s. Back then, the Yellow Pages had a fabulous, catchy slogan that was, "Let your fingers do the walking." We're going to make one small change, and we're going to remember our 6 steps by spelling out the slogan, "Let your fingers do the talking." The 6 components that we have will be L, limiting distractions, Y, your audio mute, F, figure out the controls, D, do not put the phone on hold, T, 3 main points, and T, take action. I'll go into each of those in a little bit more detail now. Starting with limiting distractions. First and foremost, let others know that you'll be in a training or a meeting. A significant number of the third-party distractions that we get are completely unintentional. People just don't realize that you're attending a virtual meeting and they come in with a normal conversation that they would want to have with you. By setting up a meeting sign on your door or on your cubicle, or sending an email out to the people that are on your team, you can hopefully minimize the number of people that unintentionally come in because they don't realize you're on a webinar. At home, you can also do this with a sign, or you can have a signal. For example, every time I turn on this particular light, you guys know that I'm on a webinar or in a virtual meeting. You can also just have a conversation with people, especially if you're at home, and let people know that you'll be in that training. While it probably will not remove all of those distractions that are unintentional, it should decrease them quite a bit. Whenever possible, go into a separate workspace for your virtual training or meeting. This actually will serve 3 purposes. First and foremost, it limits the distractions that you may hear around you if you're out in the open. The second thing it can do is limit your virtual session from being distracting to others around you. This is especially true in the office. If you have an open office environment or an open cubicle environment, and if your webinar virtual series has videos in it or there's a significant amount of laughter, depending on how you're listening in, those can become distracting to those around you. The final benefit is that it enables you to ensure more privacy. And if you're discussing a confidential matter, It prevents other people from hearing something that they shouldn't hear during the virtual meeting or training that you're attending. Use earbuds or a headset whenever possible, especially if you'll be talking. On the ear side, it will help to limit the distractions that you are hearing. From a voice side, it will help for the system to hone in on what you're saying, also eliminating some of the distractions that may be occurring around you, impacting how well you can be heard by others. For your personal phone, turn it on vibrate or mute, and if possible, just put it away. We look at our personal phones hundreds of times throughout the day. Every time you look at that phone, whether you actually pick it up or not, it's distracting you from what you're doing, and you will lose yourself in thought. Wondering who's calling, wondering why that particular person is calling you right at this moment, being annoyed that they've called you for the 17th time. So take that personal phone during a virtual session and put it away. It will help minimize the amount of times your mind goes to what's happening with that device. Close out of any windows that are not needed for the training or meeting. Those email notifications that pop up on your screen will definitely pull your attention away just as easily as your phone buzzing. If you are working on a particular presentation, it becomes very easy to do one click over and start working on it again. But if you close out of those applications, now you have to go through the additional steps of minimizing the current window, double clicking on that window, possibly even logging into a program. And those are a lot more steps than just clicking over to the next screen and will likely prevent you from feeling the need to shift over too easily. And finally, if you're working from home, you want to contain your pets, make plans for your kids, and turn off appliances that may be near you. So containing the pets, we love our dogs, and it's not abnormal to hear a dog barking in the background. But when we do hear dogs barking, it does take our attention away from the program at the particular moment. And when it's your dog barking, it can become specifically disruptive if you are the ones talking. So in a moment like that, try to contain your pets. Have your pets be in an area where if they do begin barking because someone knocks at the door, or in my dog's case, the wind blows, you have the ability to not have it distract and disrupt the virtual meeting or session. For your kids, if you have older kids at home, this may not be as much of an issue. But if you have younger kids at home and there's another adult around, for you to coordinate for that adult to handle anything with the kids so that you don't have kids coming and disrupting you during the session, which will be a distraction as well. And finally, this appliance piece, if you're sitting in the kitchen and you're taking this meeting, the dishwasher may not be on the part of the cycle that it's making any noise when you start the call. But timing be what it is, as soon as you go to start talking, that is when the dishwasher will switch to the next cycle, and it can be very loud and disruptive. So limit that distraction for yourself as well as limiting it for anyone else should you actually be unmuted at the time. So there's a lot to step one, because limiting those distractions are one of the biggest things we need to do for the purposes of attention and engagement. Step two deals with your audio mute, emphasis on the word your. In many bigger webinars and trainings, the host or the moderator completely controls whether you are muted or unmuted. In a meeting, if you're not the one talking, it's typically beneficial to mute your audio. That way, none of your background noises are disruptive to the individuals who are presenting. But anytime your audio is muted, some things I want you to remember. The first one, if you're on video, people can still see you even if they can't hear you. So while they may not be able to hear you talk out loud about what is bothering your nose, they absolutely will still be able to see you use your finger to try to figure out what is bothering your nose. So just remember, video mute is something that you have to do separate of your audio mute. You'll want to make sure to turn off that webcam or cover it up if you're using it. Another thing that happens with audio mute is some people unintentionally turn it into brain mute. And as soon as you've muted that audio for yourself, your brain just decides it can start wandering and thinking and doing other things and really stop paying attention to the session as a whole. The last thing is audio mute can become speaker mute. And this is more of an intentional action when you mute the phone so that you can start to purposefully do something else. This often happens if someone walks into the room to talk to you while you're engaged in a virtual session and you audio mute so they can't hear the other person, but then you completely intentionally stop listening. Remembering that your video is not also controlled by your audio mute. focusing on the fact that just because you're muted doesn't mean you should stop paying attention, either intentionally or unintentionally, will make your overall virtual experience more beneficial. The third step is figuring out the controls. One of the first things that you want to do whenever you're using a program is figure out how to do things like ask your questions, chat, or raise your hand. In some programs, this may all be the same thing. In other programs, this could be 2 or 3 different things. In some programs, you'll want to use a combination of them. If you listen at the beginning, you'll have a pretty good idea of how the moderator plans to leverage the controls. If you're ever not sure, you can also ask. But asking questions, involving yourself in chat, raising your hands are all ways to help re-engage you in the program and ways to help focus your attention. So make sure you know how to use those. Moving your widgets, your screens, your boxes, whatever the moderator may call it, whatever you want to call it, it is the 3 things that you're seeing here. One being the webinar images for anybody who is playing a video. The second being the actual presentation that someone may be sharing. And the third being your control field that shows the different controls you can leverage as a participant. You can move those around typically. You can figure out where you need them to be. Maybe you want the video to be at the bottom and not at the top. Maybe your control panel, you want it on the left-hand side. The point is, it can be different for each person. Look for the controls and understand how to be able to move that stuff around and switch things so that what you need to focus on and what will help you be the most attentive is in the forefront versus maybe on the side or in the back. And finally, know how to mute and unmute your line. If there comes a time when you want to be able to ask a question, you don't want to be figuring out how to mute or unmute your line then. Or if you have gotten unmuted and you need to quickly remute, you want to be aware of where that is. And that could be different based upon the controls system that you're using, can also be different based upon the different piece of hardware you're using, meaning your laptop versus your computer at work. The fourth step is one I'm sure many of us are already familiar with, but just in case anyone's not, this is the D. Do not use the hold feature. Probably only going to be an issue if you are in an office environment. But when you're in that environment and you put your system on hold, in most businesses, there is a cycle of music or messages playing, which is meant beautifully to engage a customer who has to hold for a service request. But on a virtual session, that hold music is the equivalency of a loud gong, banging over and over, making it difficult to hear whoever is presenting, and in some cases requiring the webinar to completely stop or the meeting to completely stop if we can't put everyone on hold to cease that music playing. Step 5 is to find 3 main actionable points. Whether you are participating in a webinar that is an hour long or 2 hours long, your brain can only absorb so much. It's only going to remember so much. And if you focus on just looking for 3 main actionable points, it will help you to hone in. Here's some surprising information that many people may or may not have realized as they've just gone through and attended sessions. After 1 hour of attending a session, you are likely to forget 50% of what was covered. In 1 day, you are likely to forget 70%. And in 1 week, you are likely to forget 90% of what was presented. If you focus on finding 3 main actionable points, even if you do nothing else, that 10% that you're likely to remember will hopefully be 10% that's highly beneficial versus remembering that Stephanie has a dog who barks whenever the wind blows. So your brain will remember different and weird things. Honing in and trying to help clarify what it's going to remember is going to make this session more productive and more effective for you. This may not be something that pertains as much when we're dealing with a meeting scenario, but I still think it's a good takeaway and something to keep in mind anytime you're actively involved in anything virtually. And the final step, the final T, is regarding the taking of action and actively participating in the session. The first thing you see here, taking notes, will help with that recollection of that 50, 70, and 90% that you typically start to lose. Taking the note will help to embed that thought into your mind even more. And then it's there to review anytime you want to pull up and see the information that you had. While you may forget 90% of the information that was covered in the seminar, it doesn't mean that you have to forego that knowledge. And if you've taken notes on it, you'll be able to trace back to those notes to be able to gather that information at a later date. Ask questions. Asking questions is a great way to engage, and it forces you to pay attention a little bit more so that you can figure out what you want to be asking a question about. Participate in the polls. Polls can sometimes have to do with the content, it may have to do with the current environment, or it could just be something silly like, what is your favorite color? Even if you find the poll ridiculous, I highly encourage you, go ahead and participate in them. They help to engage others. They will force you to get back and engage into that particular webinar, which helps with your overall learning and effectiveness and helps with your attention span waning. And finally, raise your hand. When the moderator asks you to raise your hand for whatever reason, when it's applicable, please make sure you do so. One thing you should be aware of is that some moderators use the raise your hand feature to be able to check and see how much people are paying attention. And not raising your hand lets them know that you're not actively engaged and not paying attention. So definitely be involved. Listen to what they're asking you to raise your hand about and raise your hand. It's a small gesture, but it pulls your attention back, and again, it re-engages you in the session overall. So in summary, the 6 steps that we have are limiting your distractions. Again, we want to limit as many of those as possible. Why? Muting your audio, not muting your mind. F, figuring out the controls. Different systems are different, and it is okay to ask. D, do not put your phone on hold. Hold music can be highly disruptive. T, 3 main points. Attempt to find 3 actionable takeaways from any session that you're involved in. And finally, T, take action. Participate, participate, and participate. For those of you who are going to be joining us for our moderator webinar, we look forward to having you in that session. We appreciate all of you who participated today, and we look forward to having you in future sessions as well.